Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Whitaker. I'm part of the International DTS Center, and I'm really looking forward today to share with you the history of the DTS curriculum. I know that may sound a little boring, or you may be like, why are we learning about the history of the DTS curriculum? But what I wanted to share with you is that the DTS curriculum is not something that has come out of a void or in a vacuum, but there's a whole story behind the DTS curriculum and how we have gotten to the point that we are today with the Reframe that many of you are being introduced to and have become familiar with in the last year or two. So I wanted just to start out a little bit and explain to you, I absolutely love the DTS. I think it is an amazing tool that the Lord has given YWAM to use and to literally disciple the nations. And one of the things I absolutely love about the DTS is that every DTS is different. And you'll see as we talk about the curriculum, one of the unique aspects of our curriculum is that there are specifics, there are details, but along with those specifics and details, there is so much room for creativity, for the leading of the Holy Spirit. We're not locked into a box in many areas with the DTS curriculum. In fact, we're given so much freedom to really be listening to Holy Spirit and allowing Him to show us, this is how I want you to proceed with this particular category, the character and nature of God in this school, or this is how you should format or bring into being this particular, maybe the area of missions or the area of spiritual warfare. So we have broad categories, we have many details and many specifics for those who need it, but there's also so much room for us to be listening to Holy Spirit, to be creative, to make each and every DTS unique, because the truth is every DTS is unique. Every DTS has different people that are coming together. Every DTS has a different staff group that is leading it. Every DTS is set in a context of a different time in history. And so we want to be sensitive to how God is moving through the people that He brings to DTSs, as well as the time in history that we're having each specific DTS. So I wanted to start off and just help you understand, as I said in the beginning, that the curriculum that we have come to now, the Reframe, that shows the timeline and the story, that is one of several DTS curriculums that have unfolded, but they're not different. They are, in essence, the content is the same. For the most part, what has changed is, if you want to say, the packaging or the way we have presented these curriculums, and that has been specific. That has been so that that particular curriculum can meet the needs of that generation that is struggling or is challenged to lead DTSs in their time. So in the very beginning, I want to start off with the category of the School of Evangelism, which is really how the DTS started off in 1969, when Lauren and Darlene led the first one in Switzerland. And those first SOEs, they were actually almost a year long, and they included in them, along with lecture phase and outreach phase, they included a Middle Eastern field trip that went through the Middle East to the Holy Land, and a lot of on-site training and biblical training in places like Turkey and in Israel and on the island of Cyprus. And many people have said they would love to go back to that format, or they would love to include that in the DTSs now. And the great thing is you could include that. You could do all of the requirements, everything that is necessary to do a DTS, and you could add a field trip similar to what they did back in the 1970s. So the general outline or overview for those first School of Evangelisms that Lauren and Darlene led, basically it was three things. It was the message, the messenger, the message, and the method. And so if you talk to any of the old-time YWAM people that have been around for years and who participated in these schools, if you ask them, what was the outline for your school, this is what they would say. It was the messenger, the message, and the method. And those speakers that those SOEs had on a regular basis were people like Francis Schaeffer and Duncan Campbell, Corey Ten Boom, Brother Andrew, Joy Dawson, and of course Lauren and Darlene and others. They were the people that spoke and that gave the different teachings and challenges during those schools. And of course, the school leaders were Lauren and Darlene themselves. They led those first schools in Switzerland until they became aware that they wanted to reproduce and multiply these schools throughout Europe and eventually around the world. And so they challenged people to go and to lead schools in other places. Now, what's important to understand is the people that were leading those schools, they had been doing these original SOEs in Lausanne. So they had firsthand experience with the teachings that Lauren and Darlene had set up. They understood this message and the messenger and who they were training, and they had that experience with Lauren and Darlene in their school. And so they would take what they had learned in their school and they would reproduce that in the school to come. But as the schools continued to multiply all over the world, there became a distance between those who originally did the DTSs or the SOEs in Switzerland and those who are now multiplying them around the world. And so it became a little bit, there came questions as to, now what is it that we really need to include in the DTS and what are the categories? And so through some of the questions that came forth, Darlene was leading the training branch for YWAM. She had another woman, Patty Lee, who had come alongside of her to help with the DTS, and they began to travel around the world and do workshops, and questions came up as to what is it that we're supposed to include in the DTS. And from those questions, Patty and Darlene and others in the 1980s and 1990s came up with this curriculum that many of you who've been around for a long time have seen. So this curriculum, it just basically, it was very simple, one sentence: the Christian's relationship to God, the Christian's relationship to oneself and others, the Christian's relationship to the Word, the Christian's relationship to the world, the Christian's relationship to the church, the Christian's stand against the enemy, and the Christian's orientation to YWAM International. This curriculum took up about a half of a page of paper, because what they did is they had these titles, and under these titles would be, under the Christian's relationship to God, it would say, including hearing the voice of God, the character and nature of God. Under Christian's relationship to the Word, studying the Bible, understanding the Bible's big picture. There were just a few phrases that kind of unpacked these sentences. And again, because the distance between those who were leading the DTSs and those who had originally created the SOE and DTS, it was maybe 10, 15, 20 years, there was not the strong need to have a full-blown line-by-line curriculum written out. Those people who were receiving this half-page piece of paper, they understood, oh, okay, when it's talking about intercession, that's the teaching Joy Dawson did. Those are the things that we need to include. And that was the understanding with the curriculum. So again, we now go forward into the 90s and in the early 2000s. And really in the mid-90s, we realized again that these DTSs were multiplying around the world, and we really needed to have a more specific curriculum that people understood, because they were taking these one-liners and they were assuming maybe some things, and it wasn't ever done in a malicious way or a bad way. It was just people not understanding, or people saying, you know what, I'm going to take my DTS and I'm just going to recreate that. And if their DTS was a good DTS, well run, had all of the different components of what the DTS was originally intended to have, then they reproduced a good DTS. But if that DTS didn't, they would then begin to reproduce something that wasn't quite what the original design had been for the DTS. So in 2000, a group gathered together in New Zealand. Lauren and Darlene were leading an LTS there, and there was about 20 people that came together that were part of the International DTS Center, and we began to put together the clarified curriculum, and it was led by Maureen Menard, who was the leader at that time of the International DTS Center, along with Patty Lee and Pete Thompson. And so this is the clarified curriculum, that the different categories that unfolded from that time in 2000 and was then later decided by the global leadership team for YWAM that it was approved as an official document for YWAM. That was in 2001. And so these are the categories that came forth: God's nature and character, God's intention for individuals, peoples, and creation, God's redemption, sin and the cross, God's family, his children and his church, God's world, his call and his commission, and then YWAM, a response to God. And this document was made up of concepts under each of those categories, along with attitudes that we wanted to see nurtured during those teachings and during the lecture and outreach phase of the DTS, and then actions that we wanted to see take place as a result of people understanding and learning this curriculum. So this was in 2001. Some of you are familiar with this. This is a 10-page document. It was very helpful for people who were taking it, who are now 25 years away from, or 30 years away from, the original DTSs that took place. And it was very helpful as we moved forward and we looked at what is it that we want to teach about God's character and his nature? What is it that we want to teach about his redemption and sin and the cross? And they gave very specific concepts that you could actually give to a teacher who was coming in. You could hand to the staff, and the staff could look it over and say, are we covering this? It was really a useful tool for people to use. Again, as we move forward into 2010, 2012, 13, we recognized that once again we needed to not change the curriculum, but we needed to repackage it in a way that this generation had good access, easy access, it was understandable, and it was meeting the needs of this generation. And so in 2019, 18 and 19, we created what is now called the curriculum Reframe, which you would be familiar with. And these are the categories. We have the Bible, who is God, in the beginning, what went wrong, a new beginning, Jesus Christ, and becoming a people like Jesus who bear kingdom fruit. Now, one of the things you'll notice in this is that we started off with the Bible as a category. And that is because we recognize that, 25, 30 years ago, many of the students coming to the DTS had some type of biblical background. They were coming from Christian families, or they had been churched, they had gone to seminary or Christian schools. But now, in the 2000s, we're getting people not just from Western countries that were really unchurched and did not know the Bible, but we were spreading DTSs around in many countries where Christianity wasn't even a basic belief there. So the people were coming from other religious backgrounds and had no Bible knowledge. So we've recognized that we really need to lay a very strong foundation of the Bible narrative, an understanding of the larger story. And that is what this reframe is. It is taking the DTS curriculum and putting it into the context of the larger story of God. Now, I want to show you this. So this includes a timeline, and I will be creating another teaching that will really expand on the timeline and will help you to get a better feel for what is this curriculum reframe, how do we unpack that a little bit more. But this particular, what I want you to see in this video is that the curriculum categories, the content has not changed. And so this is just a look at all the categories over the years. So we've got this original messenger message method. We have this that came out in the 80s and 90s. Really, it was like the late 80s that came forth to help people understand the DTS curriculum. And then the clarified curriculum came out in 2001. And then now we have the reframe and these categories. So what I'm hoping is you see this bigger picture is God really did give those who created the DTS and those who have continued to pass it along and have stewarded this gift of the DTS. God has given us specific aspects, specific things that are very important to include in the DTS. That has not changed over the 40 years of training in YWAM. The content, knowing who God is, having a heart for the nations, understanding Father, Son, Holy Spirit, having a passion for the Word, understanding spiritual warfare, knowing how to relate with people in a healthy way, having a heart for the lost, having a heart to reach peoples that have never been reached with the gospel. All of those and so much more has been the essence of the DTS, and that has not changed. But what has changed over the years is the way we've packaged the curriculum so that for that generation, for those DTS leaders, those DTS staff, it was more accessible, more understandable, and something that they could take and apply for their own use and their own creativity in their schools. So I just want to leave you with a couple questions that you can gather together with whoever you're watching this with and just discuss a little bit. How does this history help you as a leader to better understand the DTS? Another question is, how can you use this history to help cast vision for the DTS? So I think it's important that we cast a vision for the DTS, and so often, and this generation especially, needs to feel a connection to a bigger picture. And for sure, the DTS is connected to the larger picture of YWAM and all that God has done throughout the nations. And so how can you take this history and cast that vision that the DTS is not isolated, it is connected to the bigger picture? And then the final question is, what ways can you use this history, both with the DTS leaders and staff, but also with your base and community? I have found over and over again that it's not just the DTS leaders that are asking questions, but oftentimes other members of staff and base leaders are saying, we want to understand the history of the DTS. We want to know what is actually God's mandate to us of what is to be included in the DTS. And I think using this history, helping people see that how that has flowed from time to time to time over the decades, this will help people understand really what God has said and how we have tried to be very faithful to steward the DTS curriculum and what God has given, how He's given it to us. So I want to encourage you to look over. I want to encourage you to talk to people who have led DTSs throughout the years. Talk to some of those who were in the beginning, early stages of the SOEs and hear their stories, because you will see that the very things they were taught are the things that we have been asked to continue to pass on. And we stand on the shoulders of amazing people, brothers and sisters who have done so many amazing things with God throughout the nations. And we have the privilege of doing the exact same thing and passing this on to the next generation. And I want to be faithful to do that. And I know you want to be faithful to do that. So let's together pass on this story and help others to understand this mandate that God has given us for the DTS.